Good afternoon. We're doing it live right here, right after Guy Benson now at 3 o'clock, 790 KBC. And we do all this just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Mottek On Money, live on the air, 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com. And the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms. Of course, we'll be focusing on the Southern California firestorm disaster this afternoon. Stay with 790 KBC for the very latest on the ongoing catastrophic firestorm that's hit Southern California and the ongoing wind and fire watch heading into tonight and the ongoing recovery efforts. Coming up in just a moment, I'll be joined live by SONYA K. Blake, President and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance. Our legal eagle, attorney Royal Oakes, will be joining me live later this hour to discuss the first lawsuits filed against Southern California Edison over the Eaton fire in Altadena and parts of Pasadena. At least 5 lawsuits have now been filed alleging the company failed to de-energize all of its electrical equipment despite red flag warnings issued last week. The company says it's investigating to determine if any of their equipment contributed to any fire ignitions. The cause of the fire continues to be under investigation. Damage assessment, meanwhile, continues in the disaster area, with commercial properties in the wildfires and the exposure there, losses at least $2.6 billion. I will be discussing the very latest with Jerry Sullivan, National Managing Editor of The Real Deal, the authoritative commercial real estate online news source, coming up later this hour. Stocks, meanwhile, moving sharply higher today as we saw reaction to the latest inflation number. Consumer prices up again, 2.9% in December compared to a year ago, and up from the previous month's 2.7% increase, extending a resurgence of inflation just days before President-elect Donald Trump takes office on Monday. The reading out today pretty much matching Wall Street analyst expectations. Looks like the core index, stripping out food and energy, fell slightly, 0.2% in December, after having been stuck at 0.3% a month since August. The annual so-called core inflation rate did slip to 3.2% from 3.3%. Latest reports coming in after a stronger-than-expected hiring report for the month of December. All of this making it unlikely the Fed will be cutting interest rates anytime soon. We're also watching the fate of TikTok's U.S. operations, still in doubt today after the U.S. Supreme Court did not issue an opinion on the federal law banning it today, as had been expected, leaving the case up in the air just days before the ban is scheduled to take effect, although Supreme Court justices signaled during oral arguments that they might uphold the policy. At least 25 people believed to be dead, more than a dozen others remain unaccounted for as the wildfires fueled by the severe drought conditions and strong Santa Ana winds continue here in Southern California. We're watching the firefight continues with the Palisades fire still officially put at just 19% containment with nearly 24,000 acres burned. The Eaton fire in the San Gabriel Valley is now put at 45% containment with about 14,000 acres burned. And the Hearst fire in Sylmar, now 97% contained, and the so-called Auto fire in the Ventura County area is now 47% contained. More than 200 employees at the Jet Propulsion Lab in the La Cañada Flint Ridge area have been impacted by the Southern California fires, according to Director Lori Leshin today. She posted a statement on X, formerly known as Twitter, that employees had lost everything there. She also said the Jet Propulsion Lab remains closed except for essential activities. That is big news impacting one of the major employers there. Also, a dust and ash advisory now issued for Los Angeles County until 7 o'clock tonight due to harmful particle pollution levels from wind-blown dust and ash as the Eaton and Palisades fire continues to burn. The authorities say the pollution can embed deep into the lungs and cause health issues, including heart disease symptoms, asthma attacks, and an increased risk for respiratory infections. We heard from the IRS today. As a result of the devastation caused by the LA area wildfires, residents in Los Angeles County will have additional time this year to file their federal and state income taxes, normally set for April 15th. The tax filing deadline for Los Angeles County residents and businesses will be moved to October 15th, according to the Internal Revenue Service. Residents and businesses in the San Fernando Valley have been impacted by the firestorms of the past week in a big way. And joining us live now is SONYA K. Blake, the president and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance. Ms. Blake, thank you very much for coming to the line at this critical moment here.
Wow. Thank you so much, Frank, for doing the show and for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Take it from the top. Tell us, first of all, we hope you and your family and all of your members there at the Valley Alliance are safe. And tell us about the impact of the firestorms this past week.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, thank you so much for asking. That's the question on everybody's mind, first and foremost, isn't it? And on our hearts is how are our neighbors doing?
Yep.
And thankfully, my family and myself were safe and sound and doing well. Our Alliance office is also safe and unaffected. Our team have been affected in various ways. No one has lost their home or loved ones or pets, thankfully, but they have been impacted by evacuations and smoke and power outages and such, which is really disrupting life. And that's really, I think, a lot of what we're finding. Many of us have been impacted a lot more than the team at the Alliance, and our hearts truly, truly go out to them. And we're doing all we can to help people to find relief and plant the seeds of recovery now. I'll tell you some of the impacts that we're seeing. Of course, the Hearst fire, located, centered right there in Sylmar, has impacted quite a few people in the valley. The Kenneth fire in West Hills burned quite a bit of acres, but and both are largely contained at this point. The Sylmar fire was the one that really had the biggest impact on the Valley region. And when I talk about the Valley, that's 5 cities from Calabasas through the Los Angeles area of the San Fernando Valley, Burbank, Glendale, and the city of San Fernando. So our constituents aren't located in Altadena, Pasadena, where the Eaton fire is really has ravaged quite a few homes and neighborhoods, just have been decimated. In the San Fernando Valley region, we've largely been unaffected by actual burning down of homes. There were 2 homes in Sylmar that were burned in this 5-city region, but the impact has been devastating for families. The wind causing power outages, and of course many reasons for the power outages, but exacerbated by incredible winds. The power outages have impacted so many families. We've seen an increase in a need for food for families, those that are low income, all the way through every household that has these extended power outages just don't have refrigeration and are in need of efforts to help them to make up for that. Trees are downed and branches and debris are all over the neighborhoods. The evacuations have widespread impact in Calabasas, Burbank, Glendale. Now those have been lifted. People are going back home and going back to places filled with smoke and ash, and the air quality and the water quality have been diminished. We've been experiencing looting with folks that have been evacuated and coming back to homes that have been ravaged by looters. In the city of Los Angeles area of the Valley, we've got our neighborhoods Encino and Tarzana, and of course Sylmar, which is a part of Los Angeles. Encino and Tarzana have been greatly impacted by power outages and looting and such and so on. And then there's the job losses. So when folks work in the areas where businesses have been burned to the ground or homes where domestic workers used to work, are dog walkers and landscapers and housekeepers and those that are affiliated with those homes, as well as the commercial areas. There's just so much anxiety, families being separated and having to go to friends and family in other states or cities where they can be safe. For extended areas, the mental health impacts are widespread. So we're doing a lot. We're dealing with a lot here in the Valley.
On your live with SONYA K. Blake, the president and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance. Thank you for that comprehensive, up-to-the-minute update on what's happening there in the San Fernando Valley. It must have been very harrowing last weekend when Encino had to be evacuated, right, in parts of Tarzana in that area when that terrifying fire threatened to come over the hill there. What was the situation there, and what is the situation there now?
Yeah, there was a lot of panic, a lot of concern, schools closing, what's happening with our children, pets, everybody trying to figure out where's the safest place to be. There were evacuation centers that were established fairly immediately. The Red Cross has been deployed and is doing great work. helping people to find places where they can be. And I think it's ongoing. Things have calmed down to a certain extent as the fires become more contained and under control. Yet the damage remains with the smoke, inhalation, and the water quality being diminished, and folks just still, out of school, kids out of school, and just trying to get their bearings. So some of the funding has begun to become available now. FEMA has set up some centers with people that can help folks that have been affected with applications for help, and some of the programs are for folks that have had actual damage to their residence or business structures, as well as folks that have just been impacted by the time off that's been required or having to take that time off. So there's some relief that's beginning to come there, but there's a lot of confusion about how to apply. And if people don't fill out the applications just right, they may be denied, and they don't know that they can circle back with a phone call to help alleviate what was amiss with their application. So we're helping people to understand that. The SBA has released 3 disaster loans. They've got loans that are impacting or able to help. They're very low interest loans, but they are loans. We haven't seen grants yet. And so we're eagerly anticipating those, and we'll be sharing out that information as those become available.
On your live with SONYA K. Blake, the president and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance. And what's the best way for people to contact you to get the resources that you're offering there and the best information regarding what you mentioned about FEMA and the SBA loans and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a website that has been developed with up-to-the-minute information at economicalliance.org/disaster-relief. So they can get in touch with us there. If they're not able to get to the internet and want to call, the number is 818-379-7000, and we'd be happy to be of assistance.
That's great to know, and I know you've been working with other business groups. I've been in touch with Mike Stafford at the United Chambers of Commerce there in the Valley as well. Are all the business groups working together in the situation there?
Absolutely. We've got a fantastic partnership that we've put together even before now, and at times like these when we know we really need that safety net. The Alliance was actually founded 30 years ago in the wake of the Northridge earthquake in 1994, and then we were founded the next year as a strategic partnership of organizations like the United Chambers and some of the other partners like VICA and BizFed and some others. So today we're working with Together for LA, which is a coalition stood up by LA County, City of LA, and many of the county-based organizations that are helping be a part of the solution. Tomorrow, we'll be working with the American Institute of Architects of the San Fernando Valley and the United Chambers to present a webinar at 10 a.m. To help people understand how they can be a part of the recovery, whether they're involved in construction or they're in insurance or they have a need for rebuilding. We're talking to developers, property owners, and getting a strategic plan together for how we want to rebuild. We can anticipate a shortage of construction supplies with all the rebuilding that will be happening in Altadena, Pasadena, Malibu, and Pacific Palisades. What does that mean for those locations and the Valley? There'll likely be shortages of construction workers to handle what will be ahead, and what kind of delays in permit approvals can we expect. So we'll be talking about that and leading the way to help us plant those seeds of recovery right now.
On the live with SONYA K. Blake, the president and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance, and sadly, residents have been affected. Some have lost their homes, as you mentioned, and if anything, the homeless situation getting even worse here in Southern California because of this disaster. And I remember when the Alliance was first formed, I was Brown back on the air back in those days after the Northridge earthquake, certainly, which was probably the most comparable catastrophe to this one, although this seems to be even worse from a damage standpoint. What about the homeless aspect of all this, and how are you helping the homeless there?
Yeah, that has been a grave concern for many years, ever since funding has been decreasing for affordable housing for over a decade. And of course, so many different factors have come into play there. Certainly now we are very concerned about that. And what we're doing is we are working with the folks that can build housing. We know that there is a shortage of housing at every level, not just our emergency shelters and our transitional housing, our supportive housing, all the way through our affordable and workforce housing and our market rate. So we're very supportive of development of housing, especially along commercial corridors like the line where Metro is building the East San Fernando Valley Light Rail along Van Nuys Boulevard. Those kinds of solutions, building housing there, will help to increase density without unduly impacting our existing neighborhoods and the fabric and flavor of neighborhoods, although housing is needed everywhere in all kinds. So we work on more the longer term approach to policy formulation and getting community members involved to make sure that whatever we do together in an inclusive way, in an environmentally sustainable way, and a way that's going to prosper all of our sectors and segments of our residents.
A lot of concern now about how this recovery is going to go and cutting government red tape and so forth. Making LA business friendly has been an uphill fight, as you know, for quite some time. Over decades here now, that's been a topic of conversation. What is your assessment here of how this recovery is going to go?
Well, it's interesting. I know Governor Newsom did sign an executive order to help us rebuild faster by exempting or suspending some of the CEQA review and the California Coastal Act permitting reconstruction. Those have been two of the areas where developers and others have found the process getting bogged down. So the state is helping in that way. Mayor Bass has also issued an executive order to help expedite return and rebuilding by clearing away some of the debris, starting with that, and then working around the clock with Department of City Planning and Building and Safety. And there are about a dozen different departments that are involved with the sign-offs. And you know, in times of earthquake, it does keep us safe to have strong buildings and high standards, and yet we're not able to get projects through fast enough to house our residents. So I think there's a sensitivity and an awareness, and I think that this emergency situation has really gotten everyone working together to expedite permitting, and we're going to need it.
Absolutely, and tell us how businesses there are helping the areas that have been devastated by these firestorms in the Palisades and in Altadena.
Yeah, you know, we've got some relief centers that have been set up. The Department of Insurance has folks that can help people understand. And there's a lot of confusion about the process. So if folks have either homeowners or renters or business insurance, which covers business interruption, they are to, appeal to their insurance company and make a claim first, and then if they're underinsured or if they don't have insurance, then FEMA can consider, can kick in for consideration at that point. And so there's a lot of everybody's pulling together to help house our friends and family, to help neighbors get access to emergency shelter and food and clothing. People have to replace everything that was in their homes. When you think about that, it's just incredible, the needs that there are. And you're seeing heroic acts of altruism and people really pulling together to help our neighbors to rebuild. And so I'm excited about what I'm seeing there. And I think that it's really thrilling. A lot of companies that do construction, that do smoke and water damage remediation are stepping up to the plate to offer advice and assistance. And so I think we're really still in the early stages, and we're learning what all the needs are and where the gaps are. And organizations like the Alliance and Together for LA, that coalition, are really taking a proactive approach, because this is one of the most devastating disasters to impact our beloved city of Los Angeles. And so it's going to take a Herculean effort and very decisive leadership to get us to come back from it.
Thank you for your leadership there, and we'll keep an open line to you, and certainly appreciate everything you said here today and your spirit, and we'll get through it, and we wish everyone there throughout the Valley and throughout all of Southern California all the best in this ongoing disaster situation here. Sonia K. Blake, the President and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
My joy, heartfelt thanks to you, Frank, for what you're doing and for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you again very, very much for joining us live here. And let's get right out to the freeways now on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Our fire coverage continues in just a moment. First, a big day on Wall Street with the stock market moving sharply higher today. A rally as Treasury yields eased a bit. We also got a new reading on inflation. It was up again, but pretty much in line with expectations, and all this ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration on Monday. The Dow coming in for a closing gain of 703 points, settling at 43,221. The S&P 500 moved up to 107 points at 5,950, and the NASDAQ gained nearly 500 points at 19,511. The yield in the 10-year note eased to 4.66%. That's the one that impacts fixed-rate mortgage rates, which have been on the rise lately. The VIX index, the volatility index, Wall Street's so-called fear index, slipping today by 14%. Crypto's on a tear today. Bitcoin up about 400 now, back above 100,000 at $100,061 per Bitcoin. Ethereum moving higher slightly to 3,436 at the moment, and Doge has popped as well, back to 38 cents. Price of oil in focus today. Oil futures settling higher, snapping a three-day losing streak, it looks like. We did see the price of oil move up $2.54 to $80.04 a barrel in New York. Brent crude in London moving up more than $2 at $82.03 a barrel. A hostage and ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel reached today following more than 15 months of bloodshed. And the implementation of the deal is set to start Sunday, a day before the inauguration of President Donald J. Trump for his second term in office. Taking a look at Tesla shares, moving higher today by 8%, at more than $31 to $428 and change. Magnificent One NVIDIA also getting a pop today at more than $4 at $136.24. Price of silver moving higher by 6 cents at $31.59, and gold also moving higher by more than $5 now at $2,723 and change. And now the latest news here on 790 KABC. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KABC. Stay tuned to 790 KABC for ongoing coverage of the ongoing firestorm disaster here in Southern California. As you heard in the last news updates, a lot of concern about the still uncontained fires in the Palisades, as well as in the Altadena-Pasadena area and the Eaton fire. Group of Altadena residents now suing Southern California Edison over the deadly Eaton fire that has burned thousands of buildings, including homes and schools in that area. A number of lawsuits claiming the fire was caused by the utility company's power lines. Edison says they're not to blame. They're still investigating to determine if any of their equipment contributed to any fire ignitions, and the cause of the fire continues to be under investigation. Joining us live now, our legal eagle, Royal Oaks, longtime legal contributor here on 790 KABC. Also, he has the co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast and legal analyst here on TV stations here in Southern California as well. Royal Oaks, hope you and your family are okay in this fire disaster. You okay?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. We're hanging in. You know, we live about 5 miles west of basically ground zero of the Eaton fire, and so we've been hanging out in Pasadena with friends for the last several days. But my gosh, pretty minor stuff compared to just the tragic, disastrous loss of life in some cases and thousands of homes. So we're counting our blessings. But as you say, Southern California Edison needs to count their blessings because they've been hit with several lawsuits. And basically, Frank, the folks suing are taking advantage of the fact that in California, the law is if you're a public utility, if there's a fire, and even if you are not negligent, and even if you complied with all regulations, you still may be found liable and have to pay millions of dollars in damages And so that's what the theory is of this lawsuit. And of course, as you reported, there's another big lawsuit on the west side of town. They're suing L.A. Department of Water and Power over the failure to maintain the Santa Ynez Reservoir, 117 million gallons empty since February 2024 due to repairs on its cover. So the plaintiffs in that suit say that this was negligent. Low water pressure in hydrants made the fire fighting a whole lot more difficult than it should have been.
And what, of course, makes this especially heartbreaking is the loss of life in both situations. Royal Oaks, we're seeing at least 5 lawsuits filed in the Eaton fire situation alone against Southern California Edison. And what is your initial assessment of these lawsuits?
Well, because the law is stacked so strongly in favor of the people who have suffered injuries and devastation and loss of property, you can bet that Southern California Edison is going to be super on the defensive. But in addition to that law, to the extent there is some evidence that there was negligence, that can boost the damages. And for example, people are saying that the Eaton fire was caused because sparks were emanating from electrical towers and wires. And to the extent Southern California Edison allegedly failed to properly maintain and inspect the equipment, leading to a hazardous condition, that could make the recovery even more substantial. And of course, there are a lot of other legal arguments, as you've reported, with the budget cuts. Critics have pointed out that Governor Newsom cut the state's firefighting budget by $101 million about 7 months ago. And at the same time, significant funds were allocated to green initiatives. So, a lot of people are looking at these recall petitions and over 100,000 signatures to recall Mayor Bass. And clearly, the governor, the mayor, and other politicians got a lot of explaining to do to very angry citizens. Right.
The LADWP, of course, is not a investor-owned utility. It's owned by the city of Los Angeles. So you expect even more. You expect an avalanche of lawsuits to be filed in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Inevitably, you're going to get some folks that are pretty quick on the trigger, and they filed early lawsuits. But the statute of limitations lets people wait a long time before filing. And so, yeah, I think you're going to have numerous suits. What happens normally is when you have a whole lot of suits with a sort of a similar factual pattern, they get consolidated, and you have one or very few judges who are very expert at handling large-scale lawsuits, consolidated cases. So hopefully people will sit down and reach a settlement as opposed to letting it drag on and just making the lawyers rich. Meantime, people aren't getting relief because, as you know, it's just so difficult to get your home back. I mean, you've got homeowners insurance, sure. You've got FEMA that might help for temporary shelter. You've got the taxpayers. Congress is thinking about approving OA just like they did in the COVID situation. But, I mean, this is gigantic. We're talking about $50 billion. The recovery is going to take years, and insurance is only going to cover about half of the $50 billion. So people are really going to be struggling to try to get their homes back.
Sadly, we've seen other fire disasters, certainly in the Los Angeles area in the past. Never this severe, though. Based on your experience with these kind of cases, including utility cases, how does this normally play out when we have a fire disaster like this?
Well, the utilities, of course, are put under a microscope. They're sued. The evaluation is made as to whether they were negligent, even though they're going to have to pay a certain amount, even if they weren't. But also people look to the government. I mean, FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, they've got a cap of $44,000 per person per household, and so that's available. We talk about the insurance companies, and they've been bailing out of the state. There is something called a guarantee fund, so that every insurance company who works in the property casualty field, as opposed to life, health, disability, and so on, every insurance company has to set aside just a penny or two out of every premium they get to supply this guarantee fund with money in case an insurer becomes insolvent. Technically, they don't go bankrupt, they become insolvent. And the idea is that this state-administered guarantee fund helps folks if they happen to be dealing with a company that goes under. Now, of course, the huge companies, Allstate, Farmers, so on, it's very unlikely that they're going to become insolvent. But there are hundreds or thousands of insurance companies, and some of them may be teetering a little on the brink. And so that guarantee fund might come in very handy for a lot of people.
Is the legal system going to be overwhelmed here in the Los Angeles area?
I think after COVID, we saw an overwhelming amount of litigation, an overwhelming need for people to get help, and we came through it okay. I mean, yeah, inflation was really fueled, but I think because this was a fortunately discrete, maybe limited to a week, 10 days, 2 weeks situation, I think we'll be able to tackle this much more effectively than COVID, which turned everybody's life upside down.
Royal Oaks, thank you very much for taking the call. Godspeed to everybody there, your family and your team there, as well as your entire neighborhood and everyone here in Southern California for that matter, residents and businesses, as we continue to cover this disaster here. That is Royal Oaks, legal analyst and co-host of the Too Many Lawyers podcast, and of course, longtime legal eagle here on 790 KBC. Royal, great to speak with you again. Thank you very much for coming to the line.
You bet. Thanks.
And out to the freeways now, 790 KBC. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC as the firefight continues this afternoon. Damage assessment continues in some of the firestorm disaster areas with commercial properties in focus. Damage expected to be in the billions and billions of dollars. Joining us live now is Jerry Sullivan, National Managing Editor, The Real Deal, the authoritative commercial real estate online news source. Jerry Sullivan, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
It's my pleasure, Frank. How are you today?
Okay, we're all good, and hope you and your esteemed colleagues at The Real Deal are all okay here in Southern California in this disaster zone. I know you've been in touch with the major players here in commercial real estate, and give us your initial assessment here.
Well, listen, this is, at first, everything we might talk about and the problems everyone, the Los Angeles will face, pales in comparison to the personal losses of life and property, and so our hearts go out. But then, moving on to what's next and the rebuild. First, once the fires are completely out, the rebuilding, I think you have Los Angeles at an inflection point, and real estate will be, the determining factor of which way the city goes. How do you rebuild, and what shape that's going to take? And I think right now, Los Angeles can either double down on its current regimen, which is probably, in the view of the industry, over-regulation, and which makes everything too expensive, or begin to cut that thicket away. And this might be an opportunity for that. And let's see, is there an opportunity in this crisis?
Of course, the Los Angeles area notoriously heavily regulated, as is the state, and then you got this ULA thing also in the mix. Might that be revisited? That tax on commercial real estate transactions, the so-called mansion tax, which ended up impacting commercial real estate.
Well, it's interesting because we just did some coverage. Our Kerry Hamanaka did some coverage about, I think, Jason Oppenheim, one of the leading brokers in the residential real estate community in Los Angeles, and several others have composed a letter and sent it out publicly, calling for certain steps to be taken to try and aid the recovery and rebuilding. And one of them was a suspension of the ULA property transfer tax on sales of property in the burn zones. So that certainly would be helpful. And they had several other suggestions. Interesting suggestions. Some of the burn zones of Pacific Palisades. The California Coastal Commission has some purview there, so they're asking for some relaxation on regulation or speed up on reviews from both the California Coastal Commission, so the state level, and the LA City planners. So, but ULA certainly has been brought up in that limited regard, and let's see if it, if that starts the ball rolling in a direction that may take it further.
Certainly the business district there in the Palisades was devastated, except for Palisades Village. We had Rick Caruso on this program last week. The beautiful Palisades Village is still standing. The area around it, unfortunately, did not survive, however. The devastation in that historic stretch there along Sunset Boulevard and so forth. What are you hearing about the effort there, the initial effort there to what that's going to look like in a rebuilding process?
Well, everything's so early right now, and literally the embers have to cool. So we'll see. I think one of the overall picture is not that it's but the damage to commercial has been a small fraction of what's going on with residential. So we'll see how that plays out. I think, though, that's probably one of the few areas where the commercial has been hit significantly. I know Mr. Caruso has had a very personal view of this fire, and I'm sure has great frustration over how it burned through. I would say, and I'd be interested in your view, Frank, but the way he responded so publicly and forcefully, I got to believe he's running for mayor again.
Certainly, possibility, right? So, but he's been very outspoken and verbalizing what the folks feel largely, that they were let down in the city's leadership, of course, and especially with this, with the hydrants running dry and so forth. And now lawsuits have been filed over this as well. So a lot of people very, very upset and outraged. And by the way, his daughter lost her home in the fire there in the Palisades. So it's tough. And, of course, lives have been lost in the Palisades as well. So it's a heartbreaking situation all around. And we're going to follow it every step of the way here, Jerry. And you've been doing a great job in covering the commercial real estate aspect of all of this. So we're going to keep an open line to you and your colleagues there. Jerry Sullivan, National Managing Editor of The Real Deal, the authoritative commercial real estate online news source. Jerry, thank you very much for taking the call with us here this afternoon.
Thank you, Frank. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much. All the best to you. And big day for the stock market today, with the Dow closing up 703 points. NASDAQ roared higher by nearly 500, and the S&P 500 up 107. Stay tuned now for the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang on 790 KBC.
Bravo TV star Lala Kent holds nothing back on the Give Them Lala podcast.
No, I have a very short fuse.
Get to know the TV personality.
I don't need to watch the show because I get the real life version.
From relationships and motherhood.
Let me tell you something about breastfeeding.
To business and beyond.
You are scared of failure, so it prevents you
from trying.
This is where we implement a big set of ovaries, and then we obsess.
Follow and listen on your favorite platform.